In Hill and Weingrab's Backstage History of SNL, they talk about Neil Levy agreeing to, then having to cancel a hosting gig he secured with actor Carol O'Connor. After Neil had already worked out the details with O'Connor's agent, he went to Lorne and asked, "Hey Lorne, what about Carol O'Connor as host?" To which Lorne said, "Nope, TV." And Neil had to quickly back his way out of the commitment. Lorne had generally tried to avoid extremely well-known television celebrities, especially those who frequently appeared on other late-night shows such as Carson's Tonight Show. This week's episode, then, sees Lorne break that no TV dictum for perhaps the first time, as it would be tough to argue that host Dick Cavett wasn't best known for his work as a talk show host and as a writer for The Tonight Show. However, Cabot wasn't strictly TV. Although it was his medium, he also had quite a bit of credibility with the counterculture scene and with media critics, who appreciated his topical and controversial choice of guests and his thoughtful and conversational interviewing style. His appearance in this episode sees him try hard, and he certainly comes off as likable. However, it would seem the writers had trouble figuring out how best to use him, and the show comes off as pretty flat as a result. Nevertheless, I sometimes get the feeling shows used Cabot guesting as a sort of shorthand signifier to the audience that the show might appeal to those seeking some intellectual substance. Cheers and other later shows tried the same approach, and I suppose Cabot delivers in that regard. When he hosted NBC's Saturday Night in 1976, Dick Cavett was best known as moderator of several self-titled talk shows on various networks. Although his shows were not long-term commercial successes, Cabot had a reputation within the entertainment world for being a thoughtful and attentive interviewer and a sharp fellow, quick with a pointed follow-up question or a clever conversational comeback. In the years leading up to this appearance, Dick had interviewed a veritable who's who of popular musicians such as John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, and Janis Joplin. He'd also chaired notable headline-making debates between John Kerry and John O'Neill on the Vietnam War, and between black athlete Jim Brown and segregationist politician Lester Maddox on race relations. Cabot got his start, though, as a writer for the Jack Paar and Carson Tonight shows, and he had also tried his hand at stand-up. Frankly, I think his jokes work better on paper or coming out of somebody funnier. His delivery isn't great here. Cabot is not very natural in his monologue, but then again, as an interviewer, he's always been better playing off of other people. To make a comparison that might seem irrelevant, Dick's an interviewer first and an entertainer distant second, like the polar opposite of Jay Leno, who's comfortable telling jokes, but scripted and disinterested seeming as an interviewer. Here, we get a hokey sperm bank joke, which he delivers in dad-tastic fashion.
In fact, they're very much like a real bank. The only difference is that with a sperm bank, after you make a deposit, you lose interest.
An awful Jimmy Cliff reggae joke that bombs. Not even a chuckle, just flop sweating and brow wiping. Jeez, poor guy. It's almost painful watching somebody bomb live on SNL like this. The monologue ends with perhaps his best bit, where he lampoons his own supposed intelligence, then shoots a cow from the rafters with a prop gun as an example of his real lowbrow sense of humor. Cabot delivers the jokes they wrote for him in a workmanly manner, like he's seen a stand-up comedian once or twice but didn't take good notes. He's certainly likable, though, and that's something. Perhaps with the exception of his contemporary Bob Marley, nobody did more to bring reggae music out from Jamaica to the rest of the world than Jimmy Cliff. Cliff had had limited success as a recording artist in Jamaica before leaving for London later in the 60s, but didn't find worldwide success until the release of the 1972 film The Harder They Come, for which he both starred and provided the wildly popular soundtrack. Here he performs 3 numbers, 2 of them from that soundtrack, as well as Wajaka Man from 1975's Follow My Mind. I probably mispronounced that. Cliff's energy is palpable, and these performances actually gave me literal chills on more than one occasion. He's a very emotive singer, and the intensity is definitely felt by the studio audience, who gives him an especially raucous round of applause after his second number. Stellar stuff. This week's phone gag starts with a roadhead joke. The audience definitely got it, even if the censors didn't.
No, you remember on the freeway, that truck that passed us? I swear they could see your head. Honey, it did not look like you were napping. I've got it.
We have a report from the Patty Hearst trial, presented as artists' renderings, which are just stick figures. We pan out to see that the reporter in San Francisco is just Chevy holding his nose to simulate a news service press release. Next, the infamous Professor Backwards joke, in which Chevy details the recent murder of popular vaudevillian and talk show guest James Edmondson and states,
"According to reports, neighbors ignored the professor's cries of pleh, pleh."
Johnny Carson apparently found this joke so distasteful as to complain to folks at NBC about it. I mean, even Chevy apologized afterwards.
I'm sorry.
Perhaps sensing that O'Donoghue had gone even farther than usual over the line of polite decency with this one. I I've warmed up to Chevy and Update, but he trips on an awful lot of the jokes. Lorraine is a reporter, again, this time interviewing Danny from war-torn Angola. Danny says a few things with a terrible British accent, propositions Lorraine out of nowhere, and they make out. Okay then. Emily Latella on the Eagle Rights Amendment. It's a good thing Gilda is cute and likable enough to sell these things, because they're pretty one-note. The public service announcement tonight is from Tom Schiller as the head of the I Love Lucy Museum. He just does a Ricky Ricardo impersonation. Now, Desi Arnaz hosted the show 2 weeks after this one aired, but otherwise this one seems to kind of come out of nowhere. The first film this week is again by Gary Weiss. He has asked a tailor to seek advice on improvements to his face from a plastic surgeon, and the surgeon to seek advice on improvements to his wardrobe from the tailor. The film cuts back and forth between the tailor and the surgeon critiquing each other in turn. The juxtaposition makes for a humorous concept, but again, there are few if any chuckles to be had here. The show has always needed pre-taped filler pieces to give the cast time to change clothes, etc., but the quality of them has likewise always been hit or miss. I didn't care for this one. Dick introduces a home movie submission from someone named Harry McDevitt. If you've forgotten, Candice Bergen put out a call for these back in show 8. I'm surprised they got them so quickly. This one's a stop-motion thing where a bunch of apples go to a strip cabaret show and the apple on stage loses her peel bit by bit. Some plum policemen show up to stop the lewd and lascivious show, and then we see some newsreels claiming that there was chaos later at the cabaret as the director ate the actors. It then cuts to a shot of McDevitt actually eating the apples. This was a pretty weird thing for them to air. I'm not sure if they did it to be counterculture strange or because they were low on material and had time to film. They ran several more of these, though, over the course of the first season. Who f***ing Ray?
1 minute, Mr. Chase.
The cold open this week is wonderful. We see Chevy being pampered by ladies backstage before the program, really living it up. He's informed it's time to go on, and we see him pass by Garrett in the hall. He stops to tell Garrett how he hopes Garrett's okay with not being in the show much this week, and how even though Chevy gets all the press attention, he really enjoys working with Garrett, and tells him not to be down about not getting many sketches. Garrett reacts graciously, but then Chevy makes his way to the stage and we see Garrett performing a voodoo ritual on a doll effigy of Chevy, stabbing it in the back with needles. Chevy informs the crowd he can't do a fall this week because he somehow hurt his back. He launches into a song instead and gets a few lines into it before Garrett tosses the doll at the wall, causing Chevy to hurtle from his stool and off stage into the crowd.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
Jane plays a woman besotted with Chevy, a hunter who keeps accidentally killing things like the dog and the mailman with a gun he's toting around.
Definitely the best thing that's happened to me since George died. I'm not going to lose him either. I'm reading this book called The Total Woman.
On the advice of a self-help book, though, she keeps trying to be more and more submissive in an attempt to woo Chevy. He even shoots her son, and she writes it off as no big thing. Then he kills her daughter, and by this point, Jane's not even fazed.
My late daughter.
She just keeps on trying to get a piece of the Chevrolet. Then, as he's kneeling to propose, he freaking shoots Jane, too. Jane keels over, then Chevy breaks character, introducing himself as a representative of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. You know, a gun is only as dangerous as the man who uses it. He flubs a few more slogans, then accidentally shoots himself. Scene. Dick does several commercials for various Cabot-branded trade schools, such as Dick Cavett's School of Auto Refinishing and Upholstery and Dick Cavett's School of Hydroplane Operation.
Remember, when you take the stick, take it from Dick.
He's very likable, but these are filler fluff. Cabot does a monologue from the streets of New York City in what is apparently an homage to a Pulitzer-winning play by Thornton Wilder. I'm unfamiliar with the inspiration, but I'll give Cabot credit. It took guts to do a darkly comedic but otherwise fairly straight film noir character piece like this, and he manages all the lines without flubbing anything. It drags on a bit, however. There are lines which are meant to be comedic, but they don't get laughs. Maybe it's the delivery, maybe the pretty dark subject matter. Life in New York City circa 1976 meant lots of crime and dirtiness from what I've read of the period, and that's what Cabot describes here. Dick just seems like he's himself doing a monologue, though, not whatever noirish character he's meant to portray. This gets the coveted worst award thing, but like most of the show, it's not awful, just listless. In perhaps the strangest segment of the night, Dick presents the winner of the Cabot Look-alike contest. A fat man with a mustache who looks nothing like Dick, portrayed by satirist and actor Marshall Efren. Efren most likely came into the orbit of the show through his prior association, along with Chevy, with a critically loved cult comedy show called The Great American Dream Machine, on which both men worked. It hadn't been especially popular and is widely remembered today only as Chase's first breakthrough. However, Efren's contribution to the show was major, and it went on to influence later sketch troupes like The Kids in the Hall and Mr. Show. I honestly can't tell if Cabot is in on the joke or not here. It has a feeling of improv, different than what the show usually feels. Efren is pretty entertaining in a weird way, too. I came away from this one wanting to learn more about him. Dance advice from Betty Ford. Jane Curtin plays Betty Ford as an interpretive dancer dispensing banal family advice seemingly based on her own not-so-great family life. There's some doofy pot humor, otherwise it's just kind of flat. I don't know anything about Betty Ford's mannerisms, so I just see Jane here. The final letter is from a woman married to a very clumsy man, to which Betty responds rather flusteredly that she has to go help her own injured husband. Gerald Ford is clumsy, see? Get it? On repeated watchings, I appreciate the interpretive dance framing device more. The choreography and the music weren't trivial, and must have required a decent amount of rehearsal, even though the end result is a pretty meh sketch. So, good job, Jane. In this series of ads, Belushi shills for a thinly veiled H&R Block stand-in H&L Brock, who are willing to do anything to get you a better deal on your taxes, including breaking lots of laws. Belushi is oddly stilted, which I suppose is purposeful, but it doesn't really make me enjoy the sketch more, even if it's more true to the actual ads. He gets cracked up about something during the final one, though, and him almost breaking makes it infinitely more entertaining. In which Chevy interviews Dick, one of only 2 pimps in the state of Nebraska, about his new memoir. Dick's not very worldly and rather old-fashioned for a pimp, you see. No sex allowed, just messing around. That's the joke. This one isn't very good and goes on far too long, but both of them do their very best. Cabot is one of those hosts who tries hard, but by virtue of not having any comedic training or innate funniness, it's tough to write good material for him. The rest of this season, unfortunately, has lots of those. In the 10-to-1 graveyard spot, we have Alan Peterson, who does a pretty suggestive cabaret piece as a construction worker stripping to reveal women's lingerie. He's pretty hot, if you're asking me, which nobody did. I'm pretty sure this was just censor bait, but it's certainly salacious. Al went on to do a very similar number on the Richard Pryor show a year or 2 later, but I can't find out much more info on him beyond that. I love this bit, though, so if anybody knows more about him, please chime in down in the comments. Honestly, there's not much to say here. Cabot is one of my favorite talk show hosts, along with Tom Snyder, because both men had a knack for interviewing people in a way that seemed like a genuine back-and-forth conversation. They listened to their guests' responses and asked intelligent follow-ups, and I appreciate that about both men's approach. That doesn't mean Cabot was particularly funny or well-suited to this type of program, though. He's not a natural entertainer like some talk show hosts I can think of. The writers seemed to have trouble figuring out what to do with him, and the few decent jokes he got were buried under uncomfortable delivery. I personally understand Dick's predicament here. I like to think I'm a pretty funny guy, but I'm best reacting to other people or to events around me. Folks like myself and Cabot are quick-witted and good at responding and riffing, but that's not the same as being funny like a Chevy Chase or a Johnny Carson. In any event, Cabot would be invited back once more to host during Season 2 as a last-minute replace for a sick Elliot Gould. I haven't seen that one yet, but the consensus seems to be that it's a marginally stronger effort. Next week features Peter Boyle, and it's another unevenly hosted but still fairly funny installment. Stay tuned.